Welcome to the Undefined Leader, where we reimagine leadership, redefine work, and get curious. The other day, we were curious, so we asked our social media followers, what is the biggest challenge you have right now at work? And the most common answer was conflict. How should a leader manage conflict that is happening within team? So it's not the manager has conflict with their team members, it's interpersonal team situations that should a leader actually be involved with it or not? Derek, what are your initial thoughts?
It's a really good question. So obviously if you're causing the conflict, that's a certain level of involvement. Even if it's kind of indirectly with a lot of the things that we talk about of just lack of clarity or hiring. We talked about hiring in an episode. You're not building good cohesive teams with similar values and a good fit. So I think those are a lot of ways that the leader could be the root cause of the conflict. But if we're really talking about the leader is not, it is just going on around them and in a team, I think it is actually a good question of how much should you involve yourself? And just because you're a leader, I don't think that you're like the lifeguard, at the pool. I don't think that is necessarily a role that you as a leader have to take on, or the police officer or the fire, whatever we want to call it. Or is it? Or am I looking at it?
That's a good analogy. Just because you're the leader, I don't think it's your responsibility to solve every single problem that's happening within the business and within the team. But to what extent? Because if there is conflict happening within the team, there are so many negatives for that, for the outcome of what your team is supposed to do as well. Imagine if you have consistent conflict within your team, morale is probably low, performance might be low. You might have employee retention issues. People don't feel safe or comfortable or happy coming to work. I mean, there's so many negatives that come with it. So at some point, it's something that a leader should figure out. How should I be solving these problems? Should I not be? And if so, how do I and how much?
Because our most recent episode before this one was on micromanagement. So, at what point, if you're solving all the conflict and, jumping into the pool like the lifeguard and, rescuing people, at what point is that just micromanagement? Because you're not letting people around you learn conflict management skills, or you're not allowing them the time to let it work itself out and for them to collaborate and, discover working boundaries and how to work with each other if you just solve it immediately.
Yeah. Well, before this episode, Derek and I actually took a test that told us how we manage conflict, how both of us go as leaders manage conflict. So Derek, tell our audience a little bit about this test.
Yeah, it's the Thomas-Kilmann Conflict Instrument or something like that. It's actually done through Myers-Briggs, which is the probably the most famous personality test. And the idea behind it is there are 5 styles or approaches to how you handle conflict. It is the avoiding, the accommodating, the competing, the compromising, and the collaborating. And I think too, it's always like with any of these assessments that are meant as like a leadership tool, none of them are right or wrong. It's just going to be like your natural style. And there are actually correct uses for all 5 of the styles. And there are overuses on all 5 of the styles. You might lean too often into a style, and there are underuses of the style. And Alex, what I find really cool is that we both predicted each other's conflict style.
We did.
Quickly too, with no hesitation or lack of uncertainty. We both guessed each other's style.
Yeah. And I think what's even cooler is our answers are complete opposite of each other.
How we have opposite grids on our styles.
Yes. So I think what we should do is let's give our audience kind of an insight into what our responses were, how we handle conflict. And then let's go back to the same situation that we just said. Let's pretend that we're a leader and there is conflict happening within our team. How would we approach that using our style?
Yeah.
Derek, what was your number one?
And it's a heavy number one. This is like 95%. My style is the avoiding style, avoidance. And essentially, like, it is just kind of ignoring it and hoping that it just goes away on its own. So in the previous episode, I mentioned that I have tendencies towards micromanaging. That is a very micromanage. That is like a laissez-faire approach to conflict.
Were you surprised by your answer? Or okay, I wasn't surprised by your answer either. What have you realized like throughout the years when you did have conflict and you're avoiding it? Like what is the superpower and the strength of that? And then what are some of the weaknesses that come with it?
Like I mentioned, none of them are right or wrong. They all have their place. And so I think when the avoidance approach is useful is when things are just not important enough, right? Or they're kind of like I don't want to just say trivial, right? Because for the people in it, but it's like you do a cost benefit analysis type of thing of like time and energy, and and especially too, I think there's a lot of prudence that goes into the avoidance, where there's this idea of I don't have enough info yet either, so it'd be better for me to kind of wait a little bit and see how it plays out, or see if it just goes away on its own, instead of trying to make it potentially worse in some ways. So that's like at its most useful. Obviously, at its most toxic is it gets worse because you avoided it. And something small, it could have been or something that's big could have been small if you would have handled it when it was small. Alex, why did you guess that so accurately for me that I'm an avoider? What clued you into to this?
Because anytime we vent to each other or speak to each other about an issue that's happening, my number one response is, well, just go talk to that person, which makes sense because my number one is the problem solver, which is the, what is it
Collaborating.
called? The collaborator.
Yeah.
So with problem solver collaborator, my go-to instinct is let's talk about it right now. Let's talk it out. Every problem is solvable if we just talk about it. We understand each other's perspective, and then we walk away from that conversation better. And so for me, my answers to you are always, well, Derek, just go and talk to this person about it and just talk it over. And your answer is always no,
No.
no. So that's why I guessed it.
Well, and I think there's a logic system that I follow. I'm not I want people to like. It's not like I'm just a coward, because I'm not a coward.
No, not at all.
Yeah, I would agree, not at all. But I think it's just again, it's a valuation of the use of my time. And a lot of times I feel like even if I did that, Alex, I don't see anything changing, or I don't see, something useful coming out of it. Or now we have conflict and hurt feelings involved, and just having conflict would have just been fight. And so, yeah, it's avoider. I'm an avoider.
Well, I think it's a very logical approach that you're taking. It's a very like systematic, logical approach of what's the information? Is it crucial that it's being solved right now? If it's not, then how much energy do I need to put into it right this second versus maybe I'll just play it out. But also you think through a lot of the different scenarios of even if we do have a conversation, what's the best case scenario, worst case scenario? So you're able to think through all of those. And then sometimes you decide, no, it's not worth spending that energy because the outcome doesn't make sense. Versus me, I'm very much like, let's just talk about it. And no matter what the outcome ends up being, we'll be better off because as humans, we came, we connected, we spoke, we tried to understand each other's perspective, and we'll learn how to work better together because of it.
So give your pros and cons of that conflict style.
Yeah. So I think the pro is it builds trust with people a lot. It builds trust. It builds a area where people can speak up freely and it's okay to fail. And because they know that I'm going to be very honest and say exactly how I feel in that situation, we'll be able to handle it. And they know that conflict isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like conflict never for me turns into this screaming match or like super negative things don't come out of the conversation. We're usually better off because of it. The negative is, I think, can cause a lot of burnout. It does take a lot of energy. So in your approach where you're conserving your energy, I am like putting 100% of my energy into whatever that situation is in that moment. And I expect the other person to also put in that much energy into the conversation for it to be that way. So it could cause burnout. And it's tiring. It's a lot of mental capacity that you have to put into it.
That makes sense to me, that it is time consuming, because then you got to find your line too, of, because we all we all do all five. It's just our use. So I'm sure for you, Alex, we're those are kind of like opposite ends, right? How we talked about ours are like swapped. But I'm sure for you though, there is a line where once it gets to that point, you might use an avoidance of, okay, now this is really not worth my time or the energy that this is going to take. And just on the other side, there's a line where I do become, I would use the collaborative when it really matters to me. If like the relationship or the whatever it is definitely worth working it out and hashing it out and all that. That one's tough though, Alex. Do you find that it's with your desire to kind of do that style of approach? What if the other person doesn't have the skills, like the communication skills, to have that type of a conversation? Like, how do you, as a leader, then how do you navigate that?
Can you give me an example? What do you mean by like communication skills?
Okay, well, let's just do an example of like the two of us. I have an avoidance style. You want to address it as a collaborator, so I might go fewer words, a fewer
Hmm.
communication, and you want to like hash it out. So as a leader in this type of scenario, how do you operate kind of in that dynamic? Or if you're leading someone who's not a big talker.
Yeah. I usually just ask a lot of questions, but if I'm realizing in the situation that that person really, really feels uncomfortable talking about this, doesn't want to talk about it, I've learned that I have to respect other people's time and energy and how you feel into the conversation too. And so the question I'll ask is, Derek, this is a really important subject for me for this reason. Is it important for you? And then if the answer is yes, then I might follow it up with, do you need more time to kind of sit on this information and think about it and then come back and talk about it later at a different time? Because what I found is, sure, communication skills could be challenging in a conversation, but I think it's more of like some people like to address it right away and some people like to sit on information and feedback. And then a lot of the times when you come back, if you're that person that wants to sit on it, think about it, like just come prepared with a different mindset, communication skills end up increasing because they feel more comfortable in their habitat in that conversation now too. So that's kind of what I've learned recently of how to handle that situation.
That makes sense. Asking questions is a great way to get them to open up, maybe, right, a little bit and engage in the topic. For the three in the middle, kind of between our two extremes on things, right? You got the accommodating, which is my number two, which again, kind of in the chart, I I probably tend to overuse it, but it's basically now with the accommodating, it's a judgment call, and what's more important to me, the relationship or winning. And so for the person that accommodates, realizes, well, the relationship and the harmony is more important, so I'll give in. So that's my second style, is
Mm.
the accommodating, versus competing is sort of, I'm going to win. And then the compromising is we both give and take a little bit. Neither really wins, but neither really loses.
Compromiser was my second one. And I think you made a really good point a second ago that every person uses all five of these at some point.
Yeah.
And so when you take the test, it doesn't say just what your top one is, but it shows you how much of each of those things that you use. So even though my very last one is the computer, and that's still 25% of my conflict management like style. And so I think that that is an important thing to remember of context matters too of how you're using it. So let's go back to the original situation then. Going back to that's our context. We're a leader of a team, and within the team, there are a few people that are having conflict within each other, and you're noticing this. And maybe someone even comes to you, one of your teammates come to you and actually tell you this. How would you handle this situation?
Tend to be environmentally hyper aware, so I tend to like pick up already on things of like the vibes off, or people off, or things like that. So that a lot of times, like I'm kind of already aware that something's up. But I think, again, in this scenario with my natural style, I'm going to wait and see. which again is technically avoiding dealing with the conflict. But it's, well, and in my mind, it's like, well, I've only heard one side, or I've only observed a little bit. I'm going to give it a chance to solve itself. I'm going to give it a chance to either just go away because something else comes up, or the people talk to each other and they work it out. But I'm just going to wait until I feel like I have more info and context before I do anything. What about for you?
I would say the same exact answer, except I go and seek for the information. And that's the opposite of like avoiding versus like going and trying to
The collaborating.
collaborate.
Mm-hmm.
So I do tend to also feel like if the vibes are off, but if that in that case, then in the next one-on-one, like even if no one came and told me something about this, I would say something like, "Hey Derek, I realized that during one of our meetings last week, you and this person had a little bit of a conflict going on. What's going on?" And so I'd be seeking for information, and then it's up to them if they're going to say,
Mm-hmm.
this is what's happening and it's really bothering me versus, oh, nothing, And so if it is, oh, nothing, then I'll probably let it be until I will not make sure. I will always make sure that it doesn't affect other people on the team. I think that would be when I come in as a leader, for sure, to come in and diffuse the situation as if it's affecting other people on the team a lot as well. And so I would start off by asking those questions. But if someone came to me, like Derek, let's say I'm your leader, and you come to me and say, "Alex, I've been having a lot of conflict with this one person on our team. I'm really struggling with this. And this person did this, and this person did this." My approach as the collaborator would be, okay, like, how do you want to solve this problem? And then I would actually put on my coaching hat and I would coach you through how you can go and solve that issue on your own.
I was going to ask that very question. It was like in my mouth, ready to ask you about. So then do you help them, or do you coach them how to do it? Or because again, this would be a style difference, right? Of a leader who's like, okay, you got it. I'm gonna take care of it. Don't worry about it. Right. And then they go do it versus coaching that person on how to handle the conflict.
I think it depends on the situation and depends on what type of conflict it is. Like if it's a conflict where this person feels unsafe or like something that is just extremely unethical or something that is really harmful, then absolutely I will come in and make sure that whatever needs to be done is done during that situation. But when we're saying conflict in this situation, let's just say they're not communicating well and there's drama, let's say. In that scenario, then I would coach the teammate on how to handle that conflict on their own.
Yeah. So you would coach me, hey, go talk to him. And I'd be like, I don't want to.
Well, for you, it's a little different because we're friends. So I'm like, why don't you just go talk to this person? But if I was actually coaching you, I would ask questions like, what do you want to do about this? So, and then if you say, I don't want to do
I
anything
just want
about
to
it, then
avoid
I'll
it.
probably ask questions of, well, how's it affecting your day to day? How is it affecting how you show up at work? And are you enjoying what you're doing? Do you think this is a long-term thing? Is it going to continue happening? And so if we keep talking through it and you really just want to avoid it, then I mean, it's up to you. But at that point, if you realize, no, this is a problem I want to solve, then I would help you by coaching you through, hey, let's role play. How could you approach this person? What could you say to this person to start that conversation?
Yeah. And this maybe now gets into our original premise about, what exactly is the leader's responsibility or role in this. Cause then if that's, if that's the answer that you're getting back of like, I want to avoid it, I don't want to deal with it, you're going to have to at some point make a judgment call on what all is this affecting, right? Because if it's affecting ability to take care of clients, or, it's starting to get into like a big picture type of thing, then your style might have to change a little bit, right?
Absolutely. And so it goes back to one of the first things you said starting this episode was ultimately it is a bit of the leader's responsibility because you're the one probably that hired these people on your team. You're the one that is promoting your core values, focusing on your core values. So if conflict is happening because someone on your team isn't aligned with your core values or isn't behaving in a way that's aligned with the core values during that time, I do think as a leader, it is part of your responsibility to support that person to be aligned with your core values again.
Then I think that's a related topic of how do you personally, as the leader, handle conflict when it is conflict related to you, right? And not just the conflict around that, because that is leading. So a lot of time in a team, the team members tend to handle it the same way that the leader handles it. And so I think a lot of this too is just modeling your style or your approach to conflict management is in itself leading.
Absolutely. I think so.
What are you going to say?
No, I was going
I
to
don't
say,
want
what
to
were
create
you going to
conflict
say?
here by cutting you off. All right. So just something that I've found interesting, because when we talk about conflict, there's conflict management, which I think is what we've been talking about. Like how do we wade through it, and what's going to be our style? Do we avoid it, or do we approach it head on? There's conflict resolution, and there's conflict prevention, and those are all different. Those are all different things. And a thought that I had was, I kind of feel like your natural style that you're going to have of the ones that we talked about are going to really influence whether you put more emphasis on those three things. So like for you, Alex, where you just kind of want to face it, that's going to make you very good at like conflict resolution. Like, let's resolve this, let's collaborate. Let's find, whatever it is that we need to find so that we can resolve this. Cause you're just facing it head on, versus for me, who my natural preference is more of an avoidance. I feel like that makes me spend more of my energy and time getting good at conflict prevention, of like, what are all the things that we need to do so we don't have conflict? Because I really don't want to have to deal with anyone's conflict, and I'd rather just avoid it. So let's just prevent it. And then I think for some of the other styles too, there might be more of, they almost like get energized a little bit by conflict, and especially like a competing style. A lot of people are heavily influenced by competition and having their ideas win, and speaking up and debating and things like that. Those are like very energizing to them. So they might appreciate more like conflict management, of being in the middle of conflict. What are your kind of thoughts there about those three, and kind of how we might gravitate towards one of those?
I think that's really good insight. It would be hard to say because like the assumption you gave about my style is conflict resolution versus prevention. I actually put a lot more emphasis and energy and focus on conflict prevention because I know how much time and energy it
True.
takes if
Good
we're
point.
already in the resolution part, that I really don't want to take all that energy. And so part of the reason why I'll actually be head on is because that's usually my prevention of the bigger thing that's happening as well that
Interesting.
might come from it. So I think you're onto something, but again, it's a different perspective of looking at it. Yeah, so like the competing one, for example, that leader is probably better at conflict management, would you
Mhm.
say? Because that
Mhm.
is what energizes them. And so, what about the accommodator?
So for the accommodator, that means you're typically going to lose, right? Because you're
Mm.
valuing the trust, the friendship, the project more so than being right. I'm speaking from experience, because the accommodator is my second type of one. So I think again, you're going to put a huge value on prevention, knowing that conflict doesn't turn out well for you. That tends to be like the way that you don't get your way. It's through that, and probably the way that you're going to get more of your way is through prevention.
And then the other one is compromiser, which is my number two, which I think that with the compromiser, I am better at the resolution of it. I think that's where the resolution comes into play, because I'm able to facilitate and mediate a conversation around how do we walk away. Conflict already happened. If we're in the resolution part, conflict already happened. And this is like us trying to find a resolution of getting out of this conflict. And so that's my compromiser of how are we all going to win or lose or win as a team out of this. That's
Pros and
interesting.
cons, right?
Yeah.
The compromise, the pros and cons.
Hmm.
This is interesting. This is all kind of interesting too, especially from that lens of the leader. And I think ultimately, if we're trying to answer the question that we were curious about of the leader's involvement, I think there's a lot of different contexts and scenarios and tools that we've talked about of being able, as the leader, to identify which of the 5 modes which are we in? Are we in more of a prevention mode? Are we in more of a management mode? Or do I need to be resolving this? Do I need to move to conflict resolution? Like you said, facilitator. Do I need to put the two people, together and facilitate almost like a peace treaty, a type of conversation? I feel like anyone in a leadership position has probably found themselves at some point in all of those scenarios.
Absolutely. And if you're listening to this, go and take that test, because it definitely gave both of us some aha moments and insight into ourselves. And I know I'm going to be more aware going into handling situations of which of these styles is needed, which of these styles is what I'm drawn to, and is it the appropriate use of that style in this situation right now? And if you are someone that is not in leadership, you're on the team and you're having conflict with someone else, I think that's a really good test to take as well, to understand how, one, do you want to solve this conflict? I think that's really important. And then the other one is, how do you want to solve it? And knowing that you should be able to feel safe to talk to your leaders and ask for their guidance and help without them needing to solve all the problems for you as well.
Conflict is inevitable, right? I think it was just any groups of people together for any type of scenario, even if you have the most amazing team, the most aligned team. So I think that is part of the idea that you're not necessarily messing up or doing something wrong as a leader when there's conflict. And we didn't even get into this whole, Alex, but we kind of did a little bit in our toxic positivity of the value of conflict and the positive aspects of healthy. So again, it's not always something that you just want to solve or resolve or manage, because some of it is needed and necessary. Like I said, it's inevitable. I think maybe the leader, you just have to figure out which side of the line is this. Is this the healthy one that we're doing right now, or is this like the toxic bad one that we're doing right now? And then kind of make your decisions after that.
And how you handle conflict as a leader models how you want the team to handle conflict. And so if this is a skill that you're able to develop in and handle conflict in a very healthy way, then you're absolutely right, Derek. I think we can now shift our minds to conflict is not necessarily a bad word. It's something that can draw a lot of innovation and creativity and energy if it's in a healthy way. And so hopefully with this episode, we gave you guys a few tools to use to get better at conflict. And thank you to our social media followers for this idea. If there's ever another episode idea that you guys want us to talk about, do some research on, please let us know in the comments. Happy conflict management.